Congrats! You figured out how to make a podcast. But before you launch your training course or start chiming in with advice on the public forums, maybe you should try your hand at even harder ways to make a podcast. Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. 2 ways to make a podcast: the easy way and the hard way. Now, by definition, most people who get into podcasting almost always take the easy way. Because why wouldn't you? If there's an easy way versus a hard way to do something for the very first time, why wouldn't you take the easy way? Because honestly, it's pretty easy to make a podcast. Getting easier by the minute. Not necessarily better, but a lot easier to make a podcast. Applications make it super easy to go. But that's the way it is with most things. It's easier today to write a book than it was 30 years ago. It's easier today to get speaking engagements than it was 30 years ago. Everything's easier. Digital makes things easier, right? With that easiness comes a false sense of expertise, I would offer to you. Now, it's not unique to podcasting. I've seen this everywhere. Very common for a new writer, someone who writes novels, for example, to go crank out their novel during NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, where they crank out some 30,000 words, 50,000 words, whatever the number is these days, and then turn and publish it on November the 1st, which is a terrible idea. But nonetheless, they get their book out there and they say, hey, I'm a published author. I'm now going to go teach other people how to do what I just did. Same way it was when websites first came around. Wow, I figured out how to make the blink tag work. Great, I am suddenly a web developer. I'm going to teach other people how to make a website that I just did, or whatever the case might be. That's very common. We see that a lot. And that's fine, because there are lots of people who can't even make it to the easy stage, who need help getting there. And that's great. So people who are willing to help them to say, hey, here's how I did it, I think that's wonderful. I think the camaraderie that comes along with helping people lift them up to the level you're at is a wonderful thing. But at the same time, I'm hoping that you're thinking about making podcasting better. The very first thing you've ever done in podcasting probably, and I'm just guessing here, probably isn't the best thing you can do after years of doing it. Especially if the ways you're doing things now, 10 years later, are the same as you were doing them, 10 years ago. You haven't really grown in the process. Maybe things have gotten easier for you, but if you're cranking out the same type of content for your podcast, there might be more to it. And in fact, there is more to it. So let's take the assumption, working podcaster, that you really do want to be the kind of person that has a training course, or the kind of person that wants to be very active in the forums, offering advice, maybe even soliciting people to make, help them with their shows. In order for you to do that, you need to take all the knowledge that you have right now and take it a step further. Take the shows that you're working on right now and take them a step further. Even if they're just hobbyist shows, take them a step further. In fact, I want you to work harder on your show than you're doing currently. I want you to do something different for your show than you are doing currently. And the reason I want you to do that is so that you can grow and expand and understand that there's more to podcasting than just the way that you do it. So here's an example. Let's say that you, like most podcasters out there, have a straightforward interview show. It's you and a guest, and that's it. Pretty straightforward and simple. You probably got that down to a fine art. You can be in and out really quickly. How about you take your next episode or a future episode and do something quite different? You can keep it as an interview style, but what if you did it more as a guided story that the other person tells, to where you take the answers to their questions and maybe you rearrange them? Maybe you do that and you cut yourself out completely, but you come back in and write narrative parts where you're doing voiceover work. And that's all people hear from you is the voiceover pieces and then the guest giving the answers. Maybe you rephrase some of the quests and some of the answers the guest gave you so that you can do a smaller segments of the guest's answers as opposed to the long, sometimes 5 or 6 minute long response. Maybe you cut yourself out completely and you do a single voice where the guest himself or herself is the one who's speaking and you never, ever, ever talk. Can you make a show sound compelling that way? If you have the ability to do so, do something radically different. What if you did something new that will never work on your own podcast, but what if you experimented with the journalistic style of storytelling, where you're capturing sounds around you, you're capturing conversations around you, you're going to have conversations with people, and you come back into the studio and you put all of those together in a nice, tight, edited process. And instead of it taking you an hour to do it, it takes you 15 hours to do it because it's hard work. Think what you'll learn about making a podcast when you've done that, when you've really gone outside of your comfort zone, and when you've done something that's a lot harder than it was previously, than what you're currently doing. How much will you grow that way? Maybe it becomes its own show. Why not? You can have multiple shows. We're podcasters. We don't just simply have a podcast. We might have lots of podcasts. Do something different. And again, not just with what you're doing. You can't just spend more time on your current processes. I'm talking about doing something radically different than you're doing today. That's what leads you to become seen more as an expert when you become more well-rounded in the space and not just doing the things you're doing today. Lots of ways you can do it as we keep on thinking about doing things easier in podcasting. I'm making the push that you should think about doing things harder. Just so you can see what they are, just so you can grow and get to that next level, so you're worthy of having your own training course. Or you've got a voice that is worthy when you're inside of those public forums offering up advice to people. Food for thought. Speaking of food, or at least coffee for thought, how about going to buymeacoffee.com/evoterra and, buying me a coffee to help support the program. You can also go to ratethispodcast.com/podpunt, ratethispodcast.com/podpunt, and leave a rating for the content that you have heard here. And if you need some help with the strategy for your business, get in touch with me. evo@podcastlaunch.pro reaches me, or go to simplermedia.pro to see a list of services that we offer clients all around the globe. See you tomorrow for another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers!